the federal election looming, homeowners and investors are wading through confusing messaging about changes to negative gearing and capital gain tax.
Here to spell out exactly what the changes could mean for you is buyer's agent and director with High Spec Properties, Amanda Gould. Always great to have you on the show, Amanda, especially at this time because you deal with this daily, and there's lots of confusion there. How are these possible changes going to affect people? What do you think is going to happen?
Okay, well, firstly, at the moment, you can claim any type of property, whether it's old or new, as long as you're making a loss against your wage. As of the 1st of January, if Labor get in, what they're going to do is they're going to amend that, and it's going to be only for brand new properties. So that's a big change. However, they will let you grandfather the properties that you've bought previous to 1 January 2020. So what that means is you can still get all of the current negative gearing benefits. So that means what I think is going to happen, we're going to see a big surge towards the end of the year of people wanting to buy on the old scheme rather than waiting for the new.
But then another one of your predictions is that we could see a decline after January of 2020. So we could see a flurry of activity leading up to that deadline, and then a real slowing down after that.
Absolutely.
And that's not your preferred option, is it really? You'd rather see a steady market where everybody felt a bit confident and that they knew what was likely to happen?
Absolutely. It's the same with capital gains tax. I mean, no one likes paying tax, and the proposed new changes are going to be increasing by 50%. So instead of paying 50% on the capital gain that you make when you sell a property, an investment property, not your own property, that's going to increase to 75%. So the knock-on effect will be less properties are going to be traded because no one likes paying tax, let alone that much tax.
No,
yeah, let's look at what you think the impacts might be of changes to capital gains tax. What do you think investors and homeowners will make of that?
I think investors will just hang on to the property for longer than necessary. You know, a good market is when it's a flowing market. So properties are it's changing hands, and they've made a little bit of money. They go on to the next project or the next property. But I think people are just going to hang on to them a lot longer. So that's going to be a big change.
And you think that's kind of, you don't understand the reasoning behind this, do you? Because it could really kind of reduce the revenue available to the government from property.
Yeah, so I don't understand. And of course, they haven't given us a lot to go on at the moment. But the revenue that the government gets from capital gains tax far outweighs the negative gearing benefits that they give back. So it doesn't quite make sense. Plus, new properties don't increase at the same rate or value as older properties. So that means there's going to be less revenue for the government. So to me, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
We should point out now, though, that this is all stuff that Labor is proposing. And so there's a lot of ifs involved here, aren't there? There's, if Labor gets in, then if they can get it through the Senate. The Senate already looks a little wobbly. We don't know how the numbers are going to stack up post-election. But this is sort of to help people think about whether they want to sit it out and wait to see what the proposed changes are, or whether they feel confident wading into the market right now.
Absolutely. Look, I think it would be far better to actually start looking at how many properties people have, maybe give negative gearing on all properties up to a certain number. Maybe the first 2 properties are taxed at this rate, and then you start losing the benefits as you get more, and it's capped at a certain amount. That would make more sense because we're actually investors are buying these properties to build wealth through property, so we're not a drain on the government for when we get older and we're going to...
And it's also in turn creating rental properties, and that's a really good point that you make, Amanda, because it's seen sometimes as this tax on wealth, and there's hundreds and hundreds, thousands of families who have their home and who have invested in one, possibly 2, but one property, and this is affecting them, whereas really everything's in this and they're working their little bums off to afford that in the first place.
Correct.
And then they're getting hit with that, which is softening and negating a time where when we hit the age, we don't know that the pension's going to be around. We've been brought up in the age with superannuation to give us that buffer. And this is for people to have that other property on the side as an investment.
Absolutely. Well, it's actually, I think when I actually did some research, it's 73% of people, investors, only have one property. So they're trying to get to the people that have got masses, but that's only a small amount, really, in the scheme of things. And, the average investor have only just got one property that are going to help them when they get older.
What about negative gearing then? Tell us about...
Well, we did have a look at negative gearing, but how does this play out then potentially for investors in the Sydney market? If we move to some case studies now and look at some recent properties that have changed hands and and how you think the numbers stack up, you know, on either side of the tax equation. If we start in Potts Point on Macleay Street.
Yeah, well, look, the good thing about a softening market in Sydney, yes, we're not going to see a big capital growth, and one of our the key objectives is sitting down with clients and understanding in our discovery session what's important to you. Is it capital, you know, short-term capital growth, or is it a yield that's going to cover a lot of your costs, or a higher yield, I should say? Now, in the past, when we had a higher, you know, higher property prices, the yield went right down into the 3%. So you really weren't even covering your interest rates. But now, because the property market softened, we've seen the yields jump up. I mean, the average yields we're seeing investors in Sydney are between 4.2 and 4.7% in blue chip locations, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was hoping to look at the figures around 58 Macleay Street in Potts Point. This one is on the market now, is it, with a guide of $750 to $850?
So if you buy
sold.
this for around $800, now this is in the Rex building in Potts Point, a very, very popular building, great location.
Sorry, it's not sold for $760.
No,
it's on the market.
It's on the market.
Yeah, sorry.
And we went through this week. That's why I thought I'd bring something in that's current. And it's renting to the Navy a lot in that building at the moment because the Navy base is just down the road.
Down the hill.
They're getting $700 a week rent, so that's 4.5% gross yield, which is fantastic, especially if you've got an interest rate in the low fours. You know, you've got a little bit of buffer for strata and council fees, water rates, etc.
It is great, and it's also an area where you don't. I mean, this is 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and no car. But for there, it's. I mean, it's in the middle of the city. You don't need a car. And great, as you said, for location for employment, just down the street.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how do you think? What do you think the scenario is for a property like this then in a market that potentially softens off the back of changes to taxes?
I think as long as you buy well, and that's, you know, really paramount, do your research, make sure, I mean, the guide might be $750 to $850, but really do your research and see what's recently sold in the building and surrounding buildings.
As a buyer's agent, what would you be trying to get that property for?
I'd be trying to get it in the 700s.
You would?
Yeah.
Like even below 750?
I don't think in the Rex you'd probably get something under 750. I think if we could get it on the low side of the 750s, that would be fantastic. That would increase the yield. I've actually used that gross yield on 800 purchase, which I think would be fair for that building.
Yep.
Because it's, you know, it's got a concierge. It's one of those really great buildings. But other places, you know, the yields are still around that 4.2 to 4.7%.
And it's also an interesting spot there because there are a lot of older blocks in that part of Sydney in particular that have company title. They're all quite different. So the banks might also look at them more strictly than they are even at lending at the moment.
Absolutely. We try to stay away from company title unless it's unrestricted, meaning that you can rent it out.
Yep.
You've got to have a few options there, plus you're going to have to put down 20% deposit, so the minimum.
All right, let's have a look at a recent sale then. This was in Wellington Street in Bondi. It sold for $795. You think this was a good deal? Yeah,
this is a great deal. So again, Bondi has come down probably anywhere from 50 to 100 grand per unit at the moment. So that would have definitely sold in 850 to high eights last year. 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom, but had a storeroom, which is unusual for Bondi unless it's a newer building, which this
somewhere
wasn't.
For the surfboard?
Yep, somewhere for the surfboard. Rent $675 and the yield was 4.4% and only a block of 6. We prefer boutique blocks because you've got less competition when you're renting and also if you do need to on-sell.
I presume you're not looking at a problem of rental there at Bondi.
No.
I mean, it's a mecca for people in Australia, let alone globally. They're all coming to stay. It's pretty high demand, isn't it?
Blue chip location, pretty easy to rent as long as you've got, you know, something really nice when compared to other places. So it has to be either position or maybe a great balcony or Art Deco because of the high ceilings. It feels a bit bigger. Yeah, so we're looking at that one in Bondi now, and as you said, it's a small building and presumably not far from. And low strata fees, you know, you've got no elevators, no care. Yeah, walk up. No concierge in that building. Yeah, beautiful character. Go up to Surrey Hills now. You've got one in 3733 Reservoir Street in Surrey Hills. Yes. This one has sold already. This sold, yeah. So this was actually something I was going to be buying for one of my clients, and she decided to go for something else. I love this building. It's right in the heart of Reservoir Street where you've got all the cafes and restaurants, walk to Central Station. 1 bedroom, 1 bath with storage, and I think that was built probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I could be wrong, but around that. So you've still got a bit of benefit there for your tax for when you're depreciating. So it's a good building. The rent was $650 a week, and the gross yield on that was 4.5%. So that was a really good buy at $649.
Oh, it was 649, was it? Sorry, I thought it was sold for 747, 749.
749.
It was 749.
Yeah,
Right.
749.
So that was a really great buy, and a good yield on that also.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if things do pan out, if Labor were to get in and if they were to get their proposed changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax through the Senate, what do you think these case studies would reflect? Do you think these are sort of government-proof purchases, or do you think it will be a very different story 12 months from now if the scenario I've just said goes through?
Yeah, I think it's going to be different in 12 months if that does get through. We will see that mini surge, like I mentioned, for the next 6 months. So if you're thinking about selling, or buying, I should say, or selling, do it now, because you don't want to be part of the herd if you're going to be buying, because that will have a little spike in prices for investment properties. Usually our investors spend between 600 and $1 million, because the yields tend to be quite good in that bracket. Once you start getting over the ones, unless you've got a view, the yield isn't as attractive.
And I'm just interested, with all this in mind, we've obviously had a cooling off, particularly in New South Wales when we had the state election. Now we've got the federal next weekend, which we know has affected market for you with your clients. I work in new build, and we know that we've felt that in the last couple of months with clients looking at homes, because everyone's just watching.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the back of that, you also have the banks who have been funny in setting their own rates and lending. Even though the Reserve Bank slowed it down, the banks are doing more so. So how do you think those things are going to pan out, if the election goes that way for Labor?
I think there's a lot of moving parts in this.
Yeah,
so, the banks especially, they're saying that they're getting a little bit less stringent. I haven't seen that.
No.
We've been up against people and we've bought properties because the other party they haven't had their finance in time. So that's still happening quite a lot. If we start seeing them relax some of those, some of those boundaries or to get into a loan, then I think that we'll see some changes. But until that happens, I think that we've got a lot to consider for investors.
Yeah.
But really, getting in now, because it's all about the grandfathering if they do.
Absolutely. Like you said, a lot to consider, and probably next week's a better time to be, 2 weeks from now, be a better time to be having a discussion when we work out how it all shakes
Well,
out.
we talk about the power of having a buyer's agent like yourself, Amanda. You share so much knowledge on the show, and you always have, and we thank you for your generosity with your knowledge and your skill and passing on that information that, you deal with so many clients, and just seeing where it's going to go through. It's exciting times coming in the real estate market, but,
it is.
Everyone says about the old man sitting on the park bench waiting for the price of real estate to go down. So it's still a good time to get in and get some advice. If they want to check out some details, they can check out High Spec as well and see what they can do. Thank you so much for joining us, as always.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Sophie.